This is Rubens' Elevation of the Cross. It's in the cathedral in Antwerp, Belgium, and when I took this picture in 2004, I was just using a little Canon digital camera. They were pretty primitive back then for the money, and it only took images in JPEG. You can see down here that I used the flash. It's indoors. You can see how bright it is over here. The pillars in the back kind of have a plaster finish to them. I found this image online. This is an artist's interpretation of what it probably looked like the day it was painted. This is what it looks like today. It's faded across the top, although part of that's the lighting effect. It has these lines. I'm not really sure what they came from, but the thing's 400 years old. So we're going to do what we can to make it look as good as we can, given the poor quality JPEG photo that we have to begin with, in an attempt to introduce you to some local transformations. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up here in this background. I'm just going to call this layer original, and I'm going to duplicate that layer. So in the past, I showed you how you could use the scale transformation tool here to scale an entire image, but we can use it to scale just part of the image too. So I want to take some of the distortion or help correct the perspective in these three panels. So to do that, I'm going to use the free select tool. And I don't think I shared this with you earlier, but you can do more than just draw or select curvy lines. You can actually do what I'm doing right here. Pick line segments, but you don't have to stay in line segment mode. You can then take and just hold the mouse down to catch that part of the hinge. You can see that this is pretty pixelated. Right now I'm at 500%. But like I said, it was just a low resolution JPEG image. But it gives us a good opportunity to come in and do some different tasks. And I'm going to grab the bottom of the frame here. There we go, that's better. Before you lay down these points, these endpoints, if you don't like where one is, before you click on the next one, you can grab it and move it around by just holding down on the mouse. And we're getting pretty close to closing here. And there we go. Now we have the marching ants. Now, here's something we haven't talked about yet. We haven't really talked too much about masks and what we can do with masks. But GIMP has built into it a function that's called Quick Masks. Now I have this selection set already selected. And right down here, hidden in the lower left corner, there's a tiny little icon. And when I click on it, we get this red overlay. And we can see through it, which is nice. You'll see that that's an advantage over working with black and white masks. But in any event, now when we paint, if we paint with white, it erases or adds to the selection. So if I come back here and click on Quick Mask again, see how my selection set changed? At the same time, if I want to take away from a selection, I switch colors and paint black. And you can change the brush size and the hardness of the brush and all the rest of that to edit your selection. Now I'm going to do a couple of undos here to get back to my original selection. I mean, I could have started with this to begin with, but I had so many straight edges here that it didn't make any sense to do anything other than using the quick select tool. But if I wanted to come in and focus on these hinges here and get them just a little bit better, I could reduce my brush size here. And then paint to either mask or take away from the selection, or use white to add to it. And when you have complicated selections, like for example hair, when you can paint your selection set, it really adds to the flexibility and the precision. So anyways, I'm going to click on quick mask icon again to toggle it. So there's my selection set. I'm working with my original copy layer. And now I'm going to do a perspective scaling just like before. Okay, this part of the video tutorial is a little bit of a do-over. Got all the way to the end of doing it, and somewhere I lost a clip on how to scale this particular proportion. So I apologize if I'm going to be a little bit repetitive here, but let's go through and show you the next step. I have the 3 panels selected, and I have the marching ants going about them. And what was different from the last time that we went ahead and scaled Big Ben was that this time we're just going to do a perspective scaling of what we've selected. So when I choose that tool and click somewhere inside of my selection set, I get a grid, and the grid doesn't cover the entire image. Again, it just covers the portion that has been selected. There isn't really too much to do in this dialog box, so I'll just kind of slide it over to the side for now. And I'm going to grab this top grip, and I'm going to try to make the left and the right edge of the central panel. And by the way, this thing is like 15 feet wide, 12 feet tall, something like that. It's enormous. Now, it was so big that it was actually painted in the church. In any event, the top of the central panel looks horizontal. I think I need to just kind of pull this left edge out just a little bit here. Just trying to get the central one done. Trying to make it look more like I took the picture standing eye level with the center of the central panel. So that looks pretty good for now. I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter, and then I'm going to pull some guides out. Just a quick way to see how close I got by eyeballing it, and that looks pretty good on the left. And over on the right, that looks pretty good as well. So at this particular point, I think we're done. Okay, so at this point, we've corrected a lot of the perspective distortion out of the image. I want you to look up here at the top right. You'll notice right now while we have these marching ants that we have what's called a floating selection. And that's actually a good thing, because when we look at this area above here, you can see that we pulled those pixels away. So at this point, we can take and fill those pixels in a number of different ways actually. But I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and let's try the move tool. So I'd like to move this up a little bit. Of course, that fixes the end of one thing. Kind of pull this over just a little bit to this side, kind of get it centered and framed. Okay, and then I'm going to come back to the scale tool here. and click on the floating selection again. Just kind of pull it straight down to the bottom. And I think that looks pretty good. Pull up a little on that side and pull over just a touch. And at this point we'll call that good. So now that we have it where we want it, we need to anchor it. So over here in our layers, where the floating selection is viewed, right down below here, see there's a little anchor? So we're going to anchor the floating layer, and that just basically turns off the marching ants and allows us to continue with our two original layers. So let's go ahead and work on the background next. Okay, so at this point we've corrected a lot of the perspective distortion out of the image. I want you to look up here at the top right. You'll notice right now while we have these marching ants that we have what's called a floating selection. And that's actually a good thing, because when we look at this area above here, you can see that we pulled those pixels away. So at this point, we can take and fill those pixels in a number of different ways actually. But I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and let's try the move tool. So I'd like to move this up a little bit and kind of pull this over just a little bit to this side to kind of get it centered and framed. Okay, and then I'm going to come back to the scale tool here. And click on the floating selection again. Just kind of pull it straight down to the bottom. And I think that looks pretty good. So I'll click on transform. Oh, now I got a little black part up there. So when I pulled it down, it did the same thing again. So let's just click on it one more time. Pull up a little on that side. And pull over just a touch. And at this point we'll call that good. So now that we have it where we want it, we need to anchor it. So over here in our layers, where the floating selection is viewed, right down below here, see there's a little anchor? So we're going to anchor the floating layer, and that just basically turns off the marching ants and allows us to continue with our two original layers. So let's go ahead and work on the background next. The walls of this particular cathedral in Antwerp aren't particularly attractive, and they take away from these painted panels. I can't really erase them, but there's a couple of things that I can do to help minimize the background and make the painting appear more part of my composition. So I'm going to go in again and quickly use the free select tool to grab or select my painting. And I'm going to go ahead and jump across this right here. Same with this hinge. I'll pause here for a second, finish this up. Okay, so I'm just about ready to close here. Oops, I didn't press the mouse button down. So let's just grab that point there. Didn't hold the mouse wheel down when I was panning here, so see, it's come back to this point and kind of get it straightened out. There we go. And now we can close. Now, even if that is a little goofy here along the side of my selection set, why I deliberately left the hinges out was so that I could show you the quick mask tool again. So you can see behind there the top of the hinge, and so what I'm going to do is go into paint. Oh, got to switch it to white. White adds, black takes away. And I have a pretty hard brush here because it's pretty pixelated, so I don't need to feather the edges of the brush too much. Let's go over to the other side. And then down below, down in this area, again I want to paint. So this time I'm adding, so excuse me, this time I'm masking. So let's see, there we go. Notice that I was doing some of this work that I missed this little spot. That's something that I could go back and fix with the clone stamp tool, which we haven't covered yet. Lots of ways to fix it, but this particular assignment I'm just going to leave it. Okay, let's take a look at the whole thing. That looks pretty good, so we'll toggle the quick mask tool again. And now we've got a selection, and if we wanted to erase along here, we could. But what we want to do is work out here, and I can't erase out here because those pixels aren't selected. So I'll go to the Select menu and Invert. And so now they're selected up above. So what I want to do now is go ahead and adjust some of the different colors. So I'm going to come in and make it darker. So I'm going to turn down the brightness of the background. Doesn't make it completely black. And let's see what happens if we diddle with the contrast a little. I think we need to add some contrast to it, which isn't unusual when you diminish the brightness. So we'll say OK to that. And actually what I'm going to do with this background is I'm going to take and cut it. And then I am going to paste it as a new layer. You probably saw that coming. Now something else, let's go to 100% here, which isn't really much of a improvement in zooming in because it's a low resolution picture. But I'm going to come up into filters and blur and apply a Gaussian blur. The reason that I'm applying a blur to it is to give it a look of depth of field. So let's try to find that column right there. And you can see over here what it looks like now. And so now when we view the whole thing, see the picture is a little bit more like it's in focus, and because I had the f-stop on my camera, the aperture set to wide open, I get a little bit more depth of field or a little bit of a blur in the background. So I like that. So I'm going to go in here now and select none. So I'll do one more thing before I start working on the painting itself. I'll come up and rename this layer, I'll just call it walls. So let's see what we can do to fix up the painting now. So now I want to work on the 3 panels to see if I can bring out a little bit more of the color and the vibrance and maybe have it look a little bit more like it looked the day after it was completed. To do that, I'm going to want to work on all 3 panels at the same time. So I'm going to choose the second button here down in the tool options, which has the same effect of holding down the shift key. I could probably use the rectangle select tool here if I did a good enough job of doing the perspective scaling, but I probably didn't. In any event, it doesn't take very long to do it this way. Close that one. And over here on the right panel, and there we go. And that'll probably be close enough, you know, in terms of enriching the colors. Unless you're really zoomed in tight, you're probably going to not notice any difference. And zooming in tight's not going to benefit anybody a whole bunch with this image because it was pretty low resolution to begin with. To help eliminate this bright spot created by the flash, I'm going to first of all come in and mask some of this. And normally I wouldn't worry about making a selection set because it's just a small spot. Probably touch it up just fine, but I've got the frame right here and I don't want to mess with that. So I'm going to start with, first of all, hard brush. And let's see, paint white. I guess everything looks okay. And I'm just going to, as carefully as I can, come along the base of the painting. So that's a pretty firm selection set there. And I think it's close enough to the edge of the frame that nobody's going to notice it at 100%. And let's see, let's go to a much softer brush now and just try to take away that hard line. Take a peek at it here. Come out here just a little bit more. I'm satisfied with that at this point. So now let's go to the Dodge Burn tool. We're going to burn, and we're going to burn away the highlights at this particular point. I'm going to use a really soft brush, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and swipe across here now once. Oh, nothing happened, did it? And you know why? It's because I'm drawing in the walls layer. I'm dodging and burning behind the panel. So we'll go back to our original layer here. Now we'll give it a try. And there we can see it working. Now you don't have to drag to, you can just come in and click now and then. Each time you click or each time you make a pass, it's like hitting it with one more coat of darkness or burning. If you overdo an area, you can come back in and dodge it, like so. I'm going to undo that though because I like what I see. Let's try just burning just a little bit of the midtones. See how that might help. See, that just darkens up everything. So I'm going to do a couple of undos. I like it along the bottom here, so I'm going to come in and deselect everything here and then just try burning these highlights up here. Just clicking the mouse. Just kind of come over here. I don't have to worry about hitting the frame. And I'm being kind of subjective here because after all, the kind of having to interpret what's there. It looks like you can see a little bit of that guy's robe hiding through the whiteness. Some of the pixels were captured, but most of them were completely overblown. So I like that. I think we'll call that good. So here's our edited picture of the famous portrait in the Antwerp Cathedral. Here's what we started with the flash and the kind of distracting background and the light reflections. And here's what we ended with. Now, we are kind of taking and making a silk purse out of a pig's ear, because the original image was low resolution, had the flash. We're taking a picture of a piece of artwork from an odd angle, but the only angle that was available to us. And we've turned it into something where, at least if you're showing it to your students, it doesn't look like something that somebody took with their smartphone. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've had good success with yours. And more than anything, I hope you've had fun with it and that yours turned out better than mine. And of course, if you have any questions, be sure to fire them my way.